President McMillan and faculty and students and parents and loved ones and grandparents, all you who have come to celebrate all that is good about this weekend, I thank you for this opportunity to bring a word of encouragement to the class of 2013. I think that someone would have to be an alum of this school and a pastor and a parent to know just how special and extraordinary it is when those three lines come together on a day like this. It gives me the opportunity to tell my son how I love him and how I'm proud of him, and I do that because I've got the microphone. I do that exactly what any other parent would do and will do as the weekend goes on. It is a wonderful opportunity, and I so deeply appreciate it. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your native land, your relatives, and your father's home, and go to a country that I will show you." I do greet you this afternoon on behalf of the United Methodist Church, my local congregation, and the many communities of faith of all religions that have upheld the members of the class of 2013 with their prayers, financial support, and encouragement. What an incredible privilege to stand before you on this amazing weekend to invoke the blessings of God upon the souls, minds, bodies, and spirits of you who have worked so hard, accomplished so much, and who possess such potential. I know these things about you because, like all other loving parents, I creep on my son's Facebook page, the pages of his friends, wondering who are these people who now sit where I once sat? Who are these people who eat pizza where I once ate pizza? Who are these people who think wise thoughts where I once stared out the window a lot of the time? I know of your wisdom because my son has brought tables full of SAE brothers to our dining room in Maine, stuffing them with inexpensive local lobster, warning them to watch out for moose on their nightly walks. Wisely, they believe very little of what he tells them. I have heard the depths of your conversations. I have learned of your good deeds, and I am impressed at your bright minds, your compassionate hearts, and your innate desire to make a difference. I remember sitting in the dining hall 2 years ago at the True Gentleman's Dinner and watching a little boy realize that he was the proud new owner of an adopted lion from the Philadelphia Zoo. You could have bottled his expression at the time. Your students made that and a million other things like it happen. It is a humbling thing to speak the word of God on any occasion, but how much more so on this day? On this day when you who are about to graduate are on the verge of accomplishing one dream and beginning to dream a new one. I speak this afternoon of things spiritual, but not necessarily religious. For even if our life journey is not tied to a particular religious tradition, we are spiritual beings, you and I. We are more than the sum of our course credits, our GPAs, our class rank, our parents' expectations. We are cells and organs and muscles and bone, but we are also the spiritual spark that enlivens our bodies to dance, to write, to reflect, to demonstrate for justice, to love, to give birth, and to live with integrity. However we name the creative force that called us into being, we are shaped by the ability to contemplate our existence, to question our purpose, and to live in accordance with our conclusions. And so it is right on this graduation eve, if that's a thing, to pause for a moment on this mountaintop in search of spiritual clarity. Where have we been? Who are we? Where are we going? If we fail to ask those defining questions, the world will have no hesitation about answering on our behalf. You are consumers, the world will say. You are demographic points of data that can be counted on to vote, shop, marry, reproduce, and expire in predictable ways at predictable times. Your opinions will be issued to you through the popular media. Your taste in music, clothing, and politics will be dictated by the purveyors of what's fashionable and acceptable. But I can tell just by looking at you that you are not those people. Equipped with critical minds and the most profound thoughts of a 10,000-year-old human conversation, girded with an understanding of science and reason, bolstered with lifelong friends and challenging mentors, you will live intentional lives. Lives based upon principle rather than popularity. Lives based upon conviction rather than convenience and compromise. I have always been fascinated by the story of Abraham. He is a major player in at least 3 of the world's great religions, including mine. In the first book of the Hebrew Scriptures, Genesis, Abraham rises up out of the mud of Noah's flood and the rubble of the Tower of Babel and begins a human journey with God, a journey that most of us moderns continue to walk in one way or another. The story of Abraham begins with the words Alex read just a few moments ago, "Leave your home and go to a country that I will reveal." In other words, leave behind what's safe and predictable and comforting and go. Go where, God? Abraham no doubt asked. I'll show you when you get there, God replies. Now go. Thursday afternoon, I put into my GPS, affectionately called Penelope, that I wanted to go from Augusta, Maine to Reading, Pennsylvania, and Penelope told me exactly to the minute how long it was going to take me to get here. She told me this is the map of what it will look like when you arrive. This is the place to stop for rest and refreshment. God isn't like that. God gives us mystery. God gives us the journey. God simply says, go. And when you arrive, you'll know it. Think for a moment about who you were 4 or more years ago when you began your journey with Albright College. When you sat over in the athletic building with the bagpipes playing, remember those? And the anonymous faculty shaking your hand as you were about to plunge into the blur of orientation. In the fall of 1980, I arrived here as the only student from Maine, the only one they had had in quite a while, in fact. It was like I'd appeared magically from another planet. For a week or so, I had one of my roommates convinced that I could only call home every 3rd day when the satellite drifted into position. They told other people. It was great. How did you get here, people asked. It was a question I kept asking myself, of course. You see, a year earlier, I happened to sit next to a visitor at a church supper, beans and hot dogs. We do that in Maine. His name was Warren Loesch. He was from New York City at the time. I still remember his name, even though we never met again. And he told me it would be a shame to go anywhere but Albright College. And he handed me his business card with the word Albright written on the back. And underneath, think about it. I could have sat anywhere at that supper that night. There were other tables and other familiar faces. But with a 20-minute conversation, the direction of my life had begun to change. It's like that when you're 17 or 18 years old. You turn left, you turn right, it affects the rest of your life. It's still like that at 22. So it was that 33 years ago at 8 o'clock on a sunny September Monday morning, I was standing outside this building, just about where Jacob Albright now stands, looking up at the steeple of the chapel, about to enter and begin Greek 101 with Dr. Ronald E. Cockcroft. And I remember stopping there and feeling the pull of the familiar, literally stopped in the sidewalk. People had to walk around me. And wanting nothing more than to run back to Albright Court, pack my gear, and get on a bus. But the moment passed, and I went in. Leave home, God says, and go to a land that I will show you. A few minutes later, I opened a small blue textbook, Crosby and Schaeffer, and an ancient language came to life before my eyes. I'd never had that happen before. A few hours later, Dr. Francis Williamson pulled me out of the cafeteria line and told me that every pre-theological student had to join the choir. He was expecting me at 3 o'clock. But I don't sing, I said. And like Yoda on Star Wars, he looked at me and said, "You will. You will." Because of that conversation, I was late for Psychology 101 with Dr. Stan Smith in Teal Hall. And when I arrived, the door had been shut. A young woman stood outside the door looking in, and there were only 2 seats left. They were in the front row, directly under the professor's gaze. "At least we won't go in alone," she said. And we sheepishly entered together with our heads held low in shame and embarrassment and took the 2 front seats. 2 freshmen, late for class on their very first day. Little did I know that I would marry that woman, that we would have 3 amazing kids, one of whom would find his way back to his parents' alma mater to have his own life-changing experiences as a member of the class of 2013. Leave home, God says, to a land that I will show you. My point is that the promised land was beckoning me that morning in September as I stood outside this chapel where Jacob Albright now stands. The loves and passions and work of my life were all about to begin to happen that very day, but a moment of fear and trembling and a desire to return to the familiar almost ruined it all. I tell my story because I suspect it is your story as well. No matter how familiar you were with Albright, even if you were one of the infamous 13th Street gang working your way up the avenue towards a bachelor's degree, enrolling at Albright represented risk and change and challenge for every one of us. Perhaps you were the first person in your family to attend college. Perhaps you traveled from a foreign land to make this your educational home for the last 4 years. Perhaps you overcame a physical or mental or psychological barrier to sit among these graduates. Perhaps you have to subdue the demons of addiction or PTSD or paralyzing insecurity every morning when you wake up just to make it to your first class of the day. Nonetheless, you did all these things. And tomorrow morning you will walk across the stage with your head held high and be recognized as a person not only of achievement, but more importantly, as a person of aspiration. And then sometime tomorrow afternoon, just about the time you're digging into a piece of strawberry pie or cracking open a cold one with your lifelong friends and family around you, you will hear a voice in your ear once again. Leave home and go to a land that I will show you. No, that is not your parents telling you to move out of your basement. It is the voice of God. It is the voice of God. And about that time, you will begin to realize in your heart that commencement is not the end. It is yet another beginning. Because you see, a college education is not only an accomplishment, it is a privilege. And like all privileges, it comes with a responsibility. 93.3% of the 7 billion people on this planet don't have a college degree. 93%. And half the world lives on less than $2.33 a day. So on a global scale, not only are you wicked smart, as we New Englanders like to say, you are fabulously wealthy. It may not feel like it, especially when that first college loan payment comes due in 6 or 9 months. You know it's out there. But you are fabulously wealthy, and what you do with those extraordinary advantages matters. Yes, you can plunge into a lifelong quest for wealth and possessions and power, but that is the familiar path, the homeland of the privileged. There are different roads that you might travel, plumbing the depths of generosity, hands-on service, parenting, mentoring, volunteering. At the same time, your career itself may well be your legacy to the world. To paraphrase the title of Thomas Friedman's book, the world is too hot, too flat, and too crowded, and facing the challenges that we are. I have to believe that 400-plus newly minted physicists, chemists, social workers, biologists, psychologists, mathematicians, nutritionists, economists, and philosophers, and all those others might make a huge difference. If only you set aside the fear and the trembling and journey along the road of self-sacrifice and dedication, that road that your elders have sadly left largely unexplored. Leave home and go to a land that I will show you. And the miracle is that Abraham did exactly what God said. Otherwise, there would have been no stories about Abraham at all, because he would have done what everyone expected him to do: stay home and stay safe. I want to tell you the story of a young man who walked into my church in Augusta, Maine a few years ago. He sat in the back, sang the hymns, fidgeted with his bulletin, and stared at the floor. When you're the preacher, you see everything. It was clear that he was uncomfortable and a little lost. I found him after the service and asked him about his story. He was 20 years old. He had just enrolled at the local branch of the state university. "My name is Just," he said, "and I need to find a church. And I once knew some Presbyterian missionaries who were very good to me, and so I asked at the gas station, are there any Presbyterians in this city? And someone said, no, but I think Methodists are probably just as good." Pointed to the steeple. We happened to be there. "Where are you from, Just?" I asked. "Rwanda," he said. A one-word answer that suggested the front steps of the church was not the place to continue this conversation. Later, we sat down to lunch together, and he poured out his story like blood from a wound. Like so many of his fellow citizens, this young man was an orphan. Many people in his family, his parents, his siblings, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, had been murdered in the genocide. He was alone in the world. Nonetheless, with the encouragement of neighbors, he had finished his schooling and had a dream of becoming an architect. So he traveled to the city, logged onto a computer, and found the closest public university in the United States that offered a bachelor's degree in architecture, Augusta, Maine. He downloaded an application, put it in the mail, and after being accepted with a full tuition scholarship, he sold his family home and all of its contents and everything else that he owned, and spent nearly every dollar on a plane ticket to Augusta a one-way trip with no possibility of return for years to come. 3 days before, he had been met by a member of the faculty and conveyed to a student apartment, anticipating the start of classes the next day. Unfortunately, it was only then that he realized that it was impossible on his student visa to earn enough money to pay for board and room. The work-study jobs had nearly all been spoken for. He was feeling lost and frightened. What unfolded over the next 4 years was incredible as a congregation took this young man under their wing and transformed his life even as he transformed ours. His glasses, which had come out of a box at a missionary station and were useless to him, were replaced with proper ones by the local eye doctor in the Lions Club. He volunteered his time at the local food bank, grateful for the food they had shared with him. He joined our mission trips to the Katrina-affected Gulf Coast and hammered nails next to us into storm-ravaged timbers, listening patiently to the stories of those whose lives had been shattered, never hinting at just how much he understood their suffering. He sketched on napkins at night at the table plans for houses that would have withstood the storm surge with complicated spider webs of bracing and support down low, and the bulk of the house up high. As the young man's circumstances grew more difficult, a retired business owner in my church came to the office one day. I thought perhaps to offer a donation to help with the situation. But in addition to dollars, he brought an idea. A council of philanthropy, he called it. A circle of bright, young, recent college grads, aged 30 and younger, who had been very fortunate in their choice of careers and desired to make a difference. For 4 years, they made this young man their project, hosting fundraisers, soliciting support, finding loopholes so that he could achieve his dream. So gifted was this young man, and so persistent his supporters, that in just a few months he will be enrolling in a Ph.D. program in architecture at a large northeastern university. Leave home and go to a land that I will show you. Young Just had done just that, selling his last possession for a chance at his dream. But the young philanthropists who assisted him had done that as well, recognizing how fortunate each of them had been, and that it was their obligation, it was their joy to redeem the life of another from poverty and tragedy. They weren't all religious, and none of them were members of my church, but this was a matter of the spirit nonetheless, a need to reach out to another human being and make a difference for good, to reclaim a life, a gifted life, from the pit of despair and loss. I invite you to that unknown land, my fellow Albrightians. We can't anticipate what our destination looks like, but we will know it when we see it, when God reveals it to us. Perhaps it will be a neighborhood in need of saving, a life being lost to the power of addiction, a disease in need of a cure, a child suffering at the hands of a batterer, a situation of violence in need of a peaceful resolution, a mind shrouded by illiteracy, an environment pleading for help, an idea or policy whose time has come, a civil right in need of defending. Seek out those places and opportunities, brothers and sisters. Be the difference that needs to be made. Form your own council of philanthropy, whatever you call it. Resist the expected and the simple path in favor of transforming the world as it is into a world that can be. In 1906, the president of Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, William DeWitt Hyde was asked, "What are the benefits of a liberal arts education?" He responded with a work entitled, "The Offer of a College." He wrote this: "To be liberally educated is to be at home in all lands and ages, to count nature a familiar acquaintance, and art an intimate friend. To carry the keys of the world's library in your pocket and feel its resources behind you in whatever task you undertake. To make hosts of friends who are to be leaders in all walks of life, and to lose yourself in generous enthusiasms, and to cooperate with others for the common good." You have left your homes and traveled to a far and distant country, brothers and sisters. And here at the end of one journey is yet one more invitation. You were born to make a difference, and now you sit here equipped to do precisely that, not only because of what you have learned, but because of whom you have become. I would pray for each one of you a sense of vocation, a sense of calling, a sense of purpose. Do not let the world deny you. The need is too great, and the time is too short. May the God of our ancestors speak in your dreams tonight. Amen.